for the world. Genevieve Lacroix Sterling had it all: the coveted Fifth Avenue penthouse overlooking Central Park, a portfolio that rivaled a small nation's GDP, and a husband, Arthur Sterling, whose name was a titan in global finance. Their life was a carefully curated masterpiece of porcelain perfection. But behind the hand-painted Gracie wallpaper and the soft glow of Tiffany lamps, a rot was spreading. One Tuesday night, in the one room that was supposed to be a sanctuary of pure love, their unborn son's nursery, Genevieve would stumble upon a betrayal so profound it fractured the very air she breathed. This isn't just a story of infidelity. It's the story of what happens when a woman of immense grace is pushed to the edge and discovers the steel underneath. The air in the penthouse at 834 Fifth Avenue was always different. A climate-controlled, triple-filtered atmosphere that smelled vaguely of money-white florals and the faintest hint of lemon polish from the daily ministrations of a silent, efficient staff. For Genevieve Lacroix Sterling, it was the scent of home, a scent she had carefully curated over 7 years of marriage to Arthur Sterling. Tonight, however, a discordant note had crept in. It was just past 10 p.m. on a Tuesday. Arthur was supposed to be at a late-night merger dinner with Japanese investors, a common occurrence in their world. Genevieve, 8 months pregnant and feeling the full weight of it in her lower back, had spent the evening in her personal study, finalizing a philanthropic bid for the new wing of the MoMA. Her family, the Lacroix dynasty of old-world textiles, had taught her that a woman's power wasn't just in the man she married, but in the legacy she built herself. A sudden thirst pulled her from her work. She padded barefoot across the cool Italian marble of the grand hallway, her hand resting instinctively on the perfect, taut globe of her stomach. The baby, whom they had already named Leo, kicked gently a familiar, reassuring flutter. She smiled. Everything was for him. The life they were building, the quiet power of their names, combined the future stretching out before them, like the park sprawling beneath their windows. All of it was for Leo. She passed the cavernous living room, its walls adorned with a Rothko and a small, exquisite Degas sculpture. The lights were low, casting long shadows. Strange. Maria, the head housekeeper, was meticulous about turning everything off before she and the staff retired to their wing. Genevieve paused, a flicker of unease prickling her skin. She heard a sound, not from the living room, but further down the hall. A faint, muffled giggle. It came from the direction of the nursery. Her heart gave a strange, painful lurch. Why would anyone be in the nursery? It was her sanctuary within a sanctuary. She had overseen every detail, from the hand-stitched constellations on the silk ceiling to the commissioned Beatrix Potter murals that danced across the walls. The scent in there was supposed to be one thing only: the gentle, calming aroma of lavender and chamomile she spritzed on the linens each night, a ritual of welcome for her son. Quietly, her bare feet making no sound, she moved toward the heavy, soundproofed oak door. The giggling came again, clearer this time. Feminine and breathless. It was followed by a low murmur. A man's voice, Arthur's voice. Confusion warred with a sudden, sickening dread. The Japanese dinner. He had texted her an hour ago, a picture of a sake bottle with the caption, "Closing the deal for us, my love. For you and Leo." Her hand trembled as she reached for the large, cold brass doorknob. She didn't turn it. Instead, she pushed. The door was ajar, left open just a crack. It swung inward without a sound. The scene that met her eyes would be burned into her memory for the rest of her life, a searing brand on her soul. The only light came from a small moon-shaped nightlight near the crib, casting a soft, ethereal glow on the two figures. Arthur, his billion-dollar Brioni suit jacket discarded on the rocking chair, had a woman pinned against the wall, right under a mural of Peter Rabbit. Her dress, a slick sheath of red silk that Genevieve had never seen before, was hiked up around her waist. His hands were tangled in her long, dark hair, and her head was thrown back, a silent laugh on her lips. Genevieve recognized her instantly. It was Serafina Vance, the daughter of Marcus Vance, the CEO of Vance Capital, a rival firm Arthur had been in a protracted and hostile acquisition battle with for the better part of a year. Serafina, with her sharp features and even sharper reputation, was a fixture on the gossip pages, always draped on the arm of some European playboy or tech billionaire. But it wasn't the identity of the woman that shattered Genevieve. It was the location. They were in the nursery, her baby's room. They were leaning against the wall where Leo would one day rest his head. Their lust-filled panting was mingling with the gentle scent of lavender she'd sprayed for her son. The crib, a magnificent piece of hand-carved cherrywood that had been in her family for 3 generations, stood just feet away, a silent witness to this ultimate desecration. For a moment that stretched into an eternity, Genevieve couldn't breathe. The air was stolen from her lungs. The world narrowed to a pinprick of nauseating light. She saw the details with a horrible, crystalline clarity. The way Serafina's red lacquered nails dug into Arthur's shoulders, the smug, proprietary look in her eyes as she met Arthur's gaze, the way his Patek Philippe. Watch a gift from Genevieve for their 5th anniversary glinted in the dim light as his hand moved down Serafina's back. They hadn't seen her. They were lost in their own sordid world, defiling the most sacred space in her life. A primal scream built in her throat, hot and acidic, but she swallowed it down. She would not give them the satisfaction of a scene. She would not break down in front of them. The Lacroix women did not cry. They calculated. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind from a lifetime ago. Tears are for the weak, mon chéri. The strong build empires from their pain. With a control she didn't know she possessed, Genevieve backed away. She pulled the door until it was almost shut, leaving only the tiniest crack. She moved backward, step by silent step, her hand still pressed against her stomach, no longer in maternal bliss but as a shield, protecting Leo, protecting herself. She retreated to the far end of the penthouse, to the guest suite that faced the glittering lights of the city, a room rarely used. She locked the door, her movements stiff and robotic. She didn't turn on the lights. She sank onto the edge of the unfamiliar bed, the brocade cold against her skin. She didn't cry. She sat in the darkness, the image of the red dress and the Peter Rabbit mural playing on a loop in her mind. The silence of the vast apartment was broken only by the frantic, silent beating of her own heart. The betrayal was absolute. It wasn't just an affair. It was a declaration of war, waged in the heart of her future. And Arthur, in his arrogance, had just armed his enemy with a weapon of unimaginable power, a mother's righteous fury. She took a deep, shuddering breath and pulled out her phone. She didn't scroll to her mother or her best friend. She scrolled to a name filed under J.C. The call connected on the second ring. "Alja," she said, her voice a dead, flat calm that frightened even her. "It's Genevieve Sterling. I need you. I need you to bring the papers. Everything we discussed in the contingency plan. Bring them tomorrow morning. 10 a.m. sharp. The other side of the line was silent for a beat, the kind of silence that conveyed complete understanding. Alger Brush was not a man given to platitudes or unnecessary questions. At 62, with a mane of silver hair and a reputation for being the most ruthless divorce attorney in New York, he had seen and heard everything. He had drafted Genevieve's prenuptial agreement 7 years ago, and at her quiet insistence had created a confidential and far more aggressive post-nuptial contingency document 2 years later, after she first felt the subtle shift in Arthur's priorities. Arthur had laughed when she'd presented a watered-down version of it for his signature, calling it her little project. He had no idea about the real document locked in Alger's vault. 10 a.m. Alger's voice was a low baritone devoid of surprise. Is the asset secure? In their coded language, the asset was not a stock or a bond. It was Genevieve's well-being and, by extension, the well-being of her unborn child. The asset is contained. Genevieve replied, her gaze distant, fixed on the distant glow of the Chrysler Building. But the environment has been compromised, irreversibly. I understand. No further contact. Do not engage. Acknowledge nothing. I'll handle everything from this point on. A car will be waiting for you at the service entrance at 7 a.m. It will take you to the Stanhope. I've already secured the presidential suite under a holding company name. You will not be disturbed. Thank you, Alger. Genevieve. He said, a rare note of something other than business in his voice. You are the granddaughter of Antoinette Lacroix. Remember who you are. He disconnected. Genevieve lowered the phone, the words hanging in the air. Remember who you are. Her grandmother had been a force of nature, a woman who had rebuilt the family's textile empire from the ashes of post-war Europe with little more than a loom and an indomitable will. She did not suffer fools, and she certainly did not suffer betrayal. Genevieve spent the next few hours in a state of suspended animation. She didn't sleep. She sat. The city lights blurred into a watercolor wash outside the window. She felt Leo stir again, a more insistent movement this time, as if sensing his mother's distress. She stroked her belly, whispering to him in the dark. It's all right, my love. Mama's here. Mama will fix this. I will build a fortress around you, and no one will ever hurt you. Around 3 a.m., she heard the faint sounds of Arthur moving about the apartment, the clink of a glass, the heavy tread of his footsteps, then the soft click of their bedroom door opening and closing. He had finally finished with his conquest and retired to their marital bed, likely reeking of Seraphina Vance's cheap perfume and self-satisfaction. The thought sent a wave of icy resolve through her, extinguishing the last embers of her grief. At 6 a.m., before the sun had fully risen over the East River, Genevieve moved. Her actions were precise and economical. She packed a single Rimowa suitcase with essentials, a few changes of comfortable maternity clothes from Loro Piana, her toiletries, her laptop, and a small, worn, leather-bound book of her grandmother's maxims. She left behind the diamonds, the couture gowns, the entire life that was a lie. In the master bathroom, she took her wedding and engagement rings, a flawless 10-carat diamond that had been featured in Vogue, and placed them deliberately in the center of Arthur's sink. A small, final gesture. She slipped out of the apartment through the service corridors. She knew better than he did a remnant of her hands-on approach to managing their home. The staff elevator descended silently, and as promised, a black, unassuming Cadillac Escalade was waiting in the delivery bay. The driver, a man whose face was a stony mask, simply opened the door for her, took her suitcase and closed her into the plush leather interior. As the car pulled out onto a sleepy 64th Street, her phone buzzed. A text from Arthur. "Morning, my love. Woke up and you weren't here. Everything okay?" The dinner went on forever. Exhausted. "See you for breakfast." Another buzz. "Where are you?" Maria said. "She hasn't seen you." Genevieve stared at the messages, a bitter smile touching her lips. The casual ease of his lies was breathtaking. She didn't reply. She powered the phone off and dropped it into her Hermès bag. She would not be gaslit. She would not be manipulated. The conversation was over. From now on, Alger Brush would do the talking. The suite at the Stanhope was magnificent, a classic old-world space with sweeping views of the park from the north. It felt anonymous and safe. A light breakfast of fruit yogurt and decaffeinated tea was already laid out. She ate mechanically, forcing herself to nourish her body, to nourish Leo. She was no longer just Genevieve. She was a vessel for the next generation of her family, and she had a duty to protect him. At 9:55 a.m., her temporary phone provided by Alger's team chimed. It was Alger. "We are walking into the lobby of your building now. Are you ready?" Genevieve looked at her reflection in the grand mirror of the suite. The woman staring back was pale, and her eyes were shadowed, but they held a fire that hadn't been there 24 hours ago. The soft, accommodating wife was gone. In her place stood the heiress to the Lacroix fortune, a woman about to reclaim her name and her life. "I was born ready, Alger," she said. Arthur Sterling woke with a familiar dull headache that only a $5,000 bottle of Suntory whiskey could produce. He rolled over in the vast bed, reaching for Genevieve, his mind still foggy. The space beside him was empty and cold. He frowned, sitting up. That was odd. Jen was always an early riser, but she usually read in the sitting area of their bedroom until he woke. He saw her rings in the bathroom sink. A sliver of unease, sharp and unwelcome, cut through his hangover. It wasn't an angry gesture like throwing them. It was a placement. Deliberate. Final. He splashed water on his face, trying to clear his head. The details of the night before were a bit of a blur. Serafina had been enthusiastic. It was a thrill doing it with her right under his own roof. The danger, the sheer audacity of it, especially with her father being his corporate nemesis, had been a potent aphrodisiac. And the nursery. That had been Serafina's idea, a wickedly decadent suggestion. He'd been too drunk and aroused to refuse. It was just a room, after all. He convinced himself Jen had probably gone to her mother's in Connecticut for the day. She did that sometimes when she needed space, though usually after a discussion. He'd smooth it over. He was Arthur Sterling. He could smooth anything over. He'd buy her a new piece of art, a ridiculously expensive bracelet from JR, and she'd melt just like she always did. He threw on a cashmere robe and padded out to the breakfast nook, expecting to find the Wall Street Journal laid out next to his freshly squeezed orange juice. Instead, he found Maria, their housekeeper, looking flustered. "Good morning, Mr. Sterling, Mrs. Sterling left very early this morning." "Yes, I know, Maria. Did she say where she was going?" "No, sir." A car picked her up from the service entrance. The service entrance? The unease sharpened into genuine alarm. Genevieve never used the service entrance. Just then the chime of the private elevator that opened directly into their foyer sounded. Arthur relaxed. It was probably her back, already ready for his apology and the inevitable reconciliation. He composed his face into a mask of charming contrition as he walked toward the sound. The elevator doors slid open. It wasn't Genevieve. It was a man he vaguely recognized from society events, a silver-haired shark in a suit so impeccably tailored it seemed molded to his frame. Behind him stood a younger, equally severe-looking associate, clutching a thick leather briefcase. "Alger Brush." The man said, his voice as cool and hard as the marble floor. He didn't offer a hand. "We have an appointment." Arthur's mind raced. Alger Brush. Genevieve's family lawyer. The man who handled her trust and philanthropic endeavors. What the hell was he doing here, Brush? This is unexpected, Arthur stammered, trying to regain his footing. "Genevieve isn't here. We know," Alger said, stepping out of the elevator as if he owned the place. His associate followed a silent shadow. "Our business is with you, Mr. Sterling." He gestured toward the formal living room. "Shall we?" It wasn't a question. Stunned into silence, Arthur led them into the room dominated by the Rothko. He felt absurdly exposed in his cashmere robe. Alger Brush and his associate sat on the pristine white sofa, placing the briefcase on the glass coffee table between them with a heavy definitive thud. "I don't understand." Arthur began, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "What is this about?" Alger snapped open the briefcase. He extracted a sheaf of documents, thick and bound in blue. He slid it across the table toward Arthur. "This," Alger said, his eyes locking onto Arthur's, "is a petition for the dissolution of marriage between Genevieve Lacroix Sterling and Arthur Sterling, filed with the Supreme Court of the State of New York an hour ago on the grounds of adultery." The words hit Arthur like a physical blow. Dissolution. Adultery. He stared at the papers, his mind refusing to process what he was seeing. "This is insane." He sputtered, a nervous laugh escaping his lips. "A misunderstanding. Jen is just upset. We had a small disagreement." "There is no misunderstanding, Mr. Sterling." Alger continued, his tone unwavering. "The petition also includes an immediate ex parte application for exclusive use and occupancy of this residence, the Hamptons estate in Sagaponack, and the chalet in Gstaad. It freezes a list of joint assets detailed on page 12, effective immediately. And it contains a temporary restraining order, preventing you from contacting, harassing, or coming within 500 feet of my client." Arthur's face paled. "You can't be serious." 500 feet. She's my wife. She's pregnant with my child. A child whose developmental sanctuary you saw fit to defile last night with Miss Serafina Vance at approximately 10:15 p.m. Alger stated without a flicker of emotion. The blood drained from Arthur's face. He felt as if the floor had dropped out. From under him, she had seen, Genevieve had seen them. The deliberate placement of the rings in the sink suddenly made a horrifying kind of sense. It wasn't an act of petulance. It was a verdict. "Where is she?" he demanded, his voice rising in panic. "I need to talk to her." "You will do no such thing," Alger said, rising to his feet. "From this moment forward, all communication will go through my office, and I assure you my client has nothing to say to you. You have 24 hours to have your attorney contact me. A list of our non-negotiable preliminary demands is on page 3. I suggest you read it very carefully." Alger nodded to his associate, who placed another, slimmer document on the table. "That is a copy of the restraining order. A process server is waiting downstairs to serve you officially. We are leaving now. I'd advise you to vacate the premises by the end of the day to avoid a rather unpleasant scene with the NYPD." Arthur was speechless, his mind a maelstrom of shock fury and a dawning, terrifying sense of loss. He had underestimated her. He had seen her grace and mistaken it for fragility. He had seen her quietness and mistaken it for weakness. He had thought he was the titan, the master of their universe, but in one swift, silent move, she had checkmated him. As Alger Brush turned to leave, Arthur's desperation curdled into righteous anger. This was an overreaction, a dramatic, hysterical overreaction. "This is because of Vance, isn't it?" He snarled, a new theory forming in his panicked mind. "She's colluding with Marcus Vance. This is a corporate tactic, using his daughter to set me up, and having Jenin pull this stunt to get leverage in the acquisition." Alger paused at the elevator, turning back slowly. A ghost of a smile, cold and predatory, touched his lips. It was the first hint of emotion he had shown, and it was terrifying. "Mr. Sterling," he said, the words dripping with condescension, "you still don't get it. You are a man who looks at a masterpiece and sees only the price tag. You think this is about business. You think this is about leverage. You are, if you'll forgive the candor, a fool." He stepped into the elevator. "This isn't about your deal with Vance Capital. This is about what you did in a room full of Beatrix Potter murals. You have gravely misunderstood the woman you married, and you are about to pay a price far greater than any corporate acquisition." The elevator doors slid shut, leaving Arthur Sterling alone in his magnificent living room, a man suddenly stripped of everything, clutching a set of papers that represented the complete and utter demolition of his life. In her suite at the Stanhope, Genevieve was not idle. While Alger was dismantling Arthur's world, she was calmly assembling her war room. A team from Alger's office had delivered encrypted laptops and secure hard drives. Spread across the antique dining table were not magazines and novels, but financial statements, trust documents and corporate holding charts she had been quietly compiling for the last 2 years. She was not the pampered wife Arthur believed her to be. Her father, a shrewd and loving man, had insisted she get her MBA from Wharton the same as him. "You must be able to read a balance sheet as easily as you read Proust Mafila," he'd always said. While Arthur was out courting investors and preening for the financial press, Genevieve had been the one poring over the fine print of his deals, often catching errors or liabilities his own team had missed. She was the silent architect of some of his greatest successes, a fact he conveniently forgot to mention in boardrooms or interviews. The first order of business was Serafina Vance. Genevieve had always dismissed her as a vacuous socialite, a tool her father Marcus Vance used for public relations, but her presence in the nursery was too specific, too targeted. It felt less like a crime of passion and more like a strategic move. "Alger, I want everything on her," Genevieve said over a secure line. "Not the gossip column trash. I want to know who she talks to, where her money comes from her travel logs for the past 6 months. Hire PIs. The best. I don't care what it costs." Already underway, Alger confirmed. "I have a team from Kroll on it. We should have a preliminary report by evening." The report that landed in her encrypted inbox at 7 p.m. was more damning than she could have imagined. Serafina Vance was far from a simple party girl. She had a degree in finance from LSE and held a discreet but powerful position within her father's company, Director of Opposition Research. Her job was to dig up dirt on competitors, identify weaknesses, and exploit them. Her recent romances with tech CEOs and hedge fund managers all curiously preceded major market moves or failed acquisitions involving Vance Capital. She wasn't a mistress. She was a corporate saboteur. The PI's report included discreetly obtained photographs. Serafina meeting with one of Arthur's disgruntled former board members. Serafina having lunch with a journalist, known for his scathing takedowns of high-profile CEOs, and the final sickening piece of the puzzle phone records showing dozens of calls and texts between her and Arthur over the past 4 months, a timeline that directly corresponded with a series of mysterious leaks from within Sterling Industries that had damaged their stock price and complicated the Vance Capital acquisition. Arthur hadn't just cheated on her. He had been sleeping with the enemy, actively and willingly conspiring with a woman whose entire purpose was to destroy him and, by extension, their family. The sheer breathtaking stupidity of it almost made her laugh. His ego, his belief that he could control and manipulate everyone, had made him the perfect mark. The next morning, Alger's team forwarded a new piece of intelligence, this one a bombshell. A source inside Vance Capital, cultivated by Alger's investigators, revealed the end game. Serafina's mission was to get close enough to Arthur to obtain sensitive information about a proprietary trading algorithm Sterling Industries had developed, code-named Prometheus. This algorithm was the company's crown jewel, the engine behind its massive profits. The plan was for Vance Capital to use this information to sabotage the acquisition from the inside, trigger a stock collapse, and then scoop up Sterling Industries for pennies on the dollar. The betrayal now had a price tag, the entire Sterling empire, valued at roughly $9 billion. Genevieve sat back, the information swirling in her mind. This changed the entire battlefield. This was no longer a domestic dispute. It was corporate warfare, and Serafina and Arthur had just handed her the ammunition. But how to use it, exposing the plot publicly, would crater Sterling Industries' stock, harming her own assets and Leo's inheritance in the process. She needed to be smarter, more precise. She thought back to her grandmother, Antoinette. Antoinette had once faced a hostile takeover from a British conglomerate. They had tried to blackmail her, threatening to expose a youthful indiscretion of her late husband. Instead of cowering, Antoinette had called a press conference, admitted to the long-past issue on her own terms with grace and dignity, and then systematically revealed every dirty trick, every instance of financial malfeasance and insider trading the British firm had ever committed, which her own team had been quietly researching for months. She hadn't just won, she had annihilated them. The conglomerate was buried in lawsuits and government investigations for a decade. Never fight on their terms. Genevieve, her grandmother's voice echoed. Create your own battlefield. Genevieve picked up the phone to Alger. Alger. The plan has changed, she said, her voice clear and decisive. We are no longer just filing for divorce. We are going on the offensive. I want you to arrange a meeting, not with Arthur's lawyers. I want a meeting with Marcus Vance, and I want to be there. There was a pause. Genevieve. That's highly unorthodox. It could compromise our position. No, Alger. She corrected him gently but firmly. It is our position. Marcus Vance thinks he's playing chess with my husband. He's about to find out he's been playing checkers with me. And I'm about to flip the board over. She had one more call to make. A number she hadn't dialed in years. It was to a man named Jean-Luc, her grandmother's former head of security in Paris. A man who owed his life to the Lacroix family. He was now retired, but his skills and his network were legendary. Jean-Luc, c'est Genevieve, she said when he answered. I have a small project for you in New York. I need to know everything about a man named Marcus Vance, not the corporate profile. I want to know where he buries his secrets. I have a feeling he and I have a great deal to talk about. The woman who had wept silently in a guest room just 2 days ago was gone. In her place was a strategist, a commander marshalling her forces. Arthur had started a fire thinking he could control it. He had no idea he was about to be consumed by it. Arthur Sterling was a man adrift in a sea of his own making. He had been served officially and humiliatingly in the lobby of his own building. He had retreated not to a hotel, but to his bachelor pad, a sterile, glass-walled apartment in Tribeca he kept for poker nights, a fact he now realized was probably well known to Genevieve's investigators. His first call had been to his own lawyer, a bulldog named Frank Miller, known more for bluster than brilliance. Frank had been apoplectic. "Are you insane, Arthur?" he'd yelled over the phone. "In the nursery. With the daughter of the guy you're trying to take over. Do you have any idea how this looks? They'll crucify you. We have to prove this is a setup." But Arthur knew it wasn't. It was pure, unadulterated arrogance on his part. He had spent 2 days trying to contact Genevieve, a barrage of texts and voicemails that went unanswered. He'd sent flowers, a veritable forest of orchids, to her mother's home in Connecticut, only to receive a call from his mother-in-law, a woman who had always adored him, whose voice was now colder than a winter tombstone. "Don't you ever contact this family again," she had said, before hanging up. The first legal volley from Alger Brush's office was a masterpiece of financial warfare. It wasn't just the petition. It was a series of injunctions and liens placed on assets Arthur didn't even think Genevieve knew about. A holding company in the Cayman Islands, a portfolio of rare watches held in a Swiss vault, his shares in a tech startup he'd invested in with his poker buddies. The prenuptial agreement they had signed was solid, designed to protect their individual assets going into the marriage. Genevieve's Lacroix inheritance was untouchable, as was Arthur's seed money for Sterling Industries. However, the prenup stipulated that any wealth created during the marriage would be split 60-40 in his favor, a point of pride for him at the time. But Alger Brush was ignoring the prenup. His filing argued for it to be thrown out entirely, citing extreme emotional duress and a pattern of deceit that constitutes gross marital misconduct. Instead, he was pushing for a net to 50. 50 split of all assets, including the foundational value of Sterling Industries, under a new interpretation of marital asset law. It was an audacious, almost ludicrous claim, but it was designed to do one thing: bog Arthur down in a legal quagmire that would cost him millions in fees and bleed him dry. "They're coming after the company." Arthur Frank Miller panicked. "They're trying to argue that her support and counsel were integral to the company's growth, making it a fully shared marital asset. It's bullshit, but it's expensive bullshit." Arthur tried to fight back. He had his accountants attempt to move funds to shift assets into new untraceable accounts. But at every turn, he was blocked. It was as if Genevieve had a map of his entire financial soul. He'd forgotten about the late nights she'd spent helping him organize his paperwork for the IRS, the way she'd created spreadsheets to track their myriad investments. He had seen it as wifely duty. She had been gathering intelligence. The battlefield was drawn. His strategy was to paint Genevieve as an unstable, hormonal, pregnant woman having an irrational overreaction. Their first motion was to demand a psychological evaluation, a nasty, brutish tactic designed to intimidate. Alger Brush's response was swift and devastating. He filed a counter-motion that included a sworn affidavit from Maria, the head housekeeper, detailing Arthur's increasingly frequent late nights and the scent of unfamiliar perfume on his clothes for months. It included a statement from their doorman, who noted the regular late-night visits of a woman in a red sports car to the building's garage. and it included the PI's preliminary report on Serafina Vance, framing Arthur not as a simple adulterer, but as a man with reckless judgment unfit to be a CEO or a father who had willfully endangered his family and his company by consorting with a known corporate saboteur. The request for a psych evaluation was laughed out of the judge's chambers. Score 1 for Genevieve. Meanwhile, Genevieve was orchestrating her own financial maneuvers. The contingency document she had signed with Alger 2 years prior, the one Arthur didn't know about, gave Alger Brush power of attorney over her personal finances in the event of a marital breakdown. Using this, they began quietly liquidating certain joint assets that were still fluid, converting them to cash, and placing them in a new trust, solely in her and Leo's names. More importantly, she was using her own vast, untouchable Lacroix funds to her advantage. She hired a team of forensic accountants, the best in the world, to tear apart Sterling Industries' books. Not to find fault with the company, but to identify every single contribution, direct or indirect, she had made. The team uncovered an email from 6 years ago, when the company was struggling. Genevieve had used her Lacroix connections to secure a meeting with a notoriously reclusive French luxury goods magnate. That meeting led to a massive company-saving investment. Arthur had taken full credit. They found the initial wireframe designs for their first successful trading interface, sketched on a napkin by Genevieve, who had a surprising talent for user experience logic. Arthur had passed them off to his tech team as his own. They found proof that the seed money for a crucial subsidiary had come from the sale of a Monet that had been a wedding gift to Genevieve from her parents. Piece by piece, she was building a case that she was not just the woman behind the man. In many ways, she was the man. The 60-40 clause in the prenup was starting to look less like a generous offer from him and more like a theft perpetrated by him. The pressure was mounting on Arthur. His board was getting nervous. News of the restraining order and the allegations of consorting with a rival had been strategically leaked to a prominent financial columnist. His world was shrinking, his power draining away. He was trapped fighting a war on 2 fronts, one for his company and one for his personal fortune, and the general on the other side knew all his secrets. He felt a primal rage building, the unfairness of it all. So he'd made a mistake. A stupid one. Yes, but was it worth all this? The destruction of everything he'd built. In his mind, he was the victim. Now, a man besieged by a vengeful wife and her cutthroat lawyer. He had to do something drastic. He had to find a weakness, an ace of his own. And his mind, clouded with fear and fury, landed on the one thing they both held sacred, their unborn son. Arthur's new strategy was as desperate as it was cruel. Through his lawyer, he filed a motion for parental rights. It was a standard move in a divorce with children, but the language was venomous. He accused Genevieve of being emotionally unstable and of planning to flee the country to France with the baby after its birth, effectively kidnapping his son and heir. He demanded court-mandated co-parenting classes and a legal framework that would give him joint custody from the moment of birth. He was attempting to tether her to him, to use their child as a permanent leash. When Alger informed her of the filing, Genevieve felt a cold fury unlike anything before. It was one thing to fight over money. It was another thing entirely to use their innocent, unborn child as a pawn in his sordid game. "He has no idea what he's just done," she said quietly into the phone, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. Leo was due in less than 4 weeks. The meeting with Marcus Vance was set. It was to take place in a neutral location, a private conference room at the offices of Skadden Arps, a firm so powerful it was like a sovereign nation unto itself. Alger had advised against her attending, but Genevieve was adamant. She needed to look Marcus Vance in the eye. She walked into the room not as a victim, but as a CEO. She wore a custom-made navy blue dress from The Row that was elegant and professional, accommodating her pregnancy without making it the focal point. Her hair was pulled back in a severe chignon. Her face was a mask of calm composure. Marcus Vance was there with 2 of his own lawyers. He was a man in his late 60s, with a weathered face and the predatory stillness of a patient hunter. He regarded Genevieve with a look that was a mixture of pity and curiosity. Arthur was nowhere to be seen, excluded from the meeting by mutual agreement. Mrs. Sterling Marcus began his voice a gravelly rumble. I want to say on a personal level that I am sorry for my daughter's involvement in your personal affairs. Genevieve held up a hand, stopping him. Mr. Vance, let's dispense with the pleasantries. I am not here for an apology. I am here to discuss the future of our respective companies. Marcus's eyebrows shot up. His lawyers shifted uncomfortably. Your daughter Genevieve continued, her voice level and cold, was tasked with seducing my husband to acquire the source code for our Prometheus algorithm. The plan was to devalue Sterling Industries and allow you to acquire it at a discount. A solid, if rather cliché, strategy. She let that hang in the air. Marcus Vance's face remained impassive, but she saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Confirmation. Here is what is going to happen now, Genevieve said, leaning forward slightly. Your acquisition attempt is over, effective immediately. You will withdraw your offer and issue a public statement, citing unfavorable market conditions. One of Vance's lawyers started to speak, but Marcus silenced him with a glance. And why would I do that? He asked. This was the moment. This was her grandmother's press conference. Genevieve looked at Alger, who slid a single slim folder across the mahogany table. The Genevieve said is a preliminary report from my investigators. It contains bank statements tracing 3 separate payments from a shell corporation you control in Panama directly to one of my husband's board members, a Mr. Henderson. It also contains a recording of your daughter Serafina bragging to a friend about how she had my husband wrapped around her little finger and would soon have the keys to his kingdom. The SEC tends to take a rather dim view of market manipulation, corporate espionage, and insider trading. Marcus's face tightened. He had underestimated her completely. He thought he was dealing with the fool Arthur. He didn't realize the Queen was in play. And that's just the appetizer, Mr. Vance, Genevieve said, pressing her advantage. My associate in Paris, a man who is exceptionally good at his job, has been looking into your own company's history, specifically your acquisition of a German pharmaceutical firm in 2012. He found some irregularities. Bribes paid to government officials through a Swiss art dealer. A very messy business. It would be a shame if that information found its way to the Bundesanstalt für Finanzdienstleistungsaufsicht. Marcus Vance was silent for a long time. He stared at Genevieve, a new respect dawning in his cold eyes. He had been outmaneuvered. What do you want? He finally asked. I've told you. You will back off from Sterling Industries. But there's a second part to my terms. I am in the process of divorcing my husband. The legal battle will be complex. I am going to need to secure a majority stake in the company to protect my son's future. To do that, I need capital and leverage. She paused, letting the implication sink in. Your daughter put my family at risk. Genevieve said, her voice dropping to an icy whisper. "And for that, there is a price. You are going to provide me with the leverage. You will sell me through a private trust my lawyer has established the 15% stake in Sterling Industries that you have already quietly acquired on the open market over the last year. You will sell it to me at a 20% discount from yesterday's closing price." Vance's lawyer gasped. "That's outrageous. That stake is worth over $1 billion. It's worth far more than the cost of having your entire company investigated for bribery, and your daughter indicted for corporate espionage," Alger Brush interjected smoothly. "Consider it a family discount." Genevieve stood up. The meeting was over. She held all the cards. Marcus Vance knew it. She had turned his own weapon against him. His attempt to destroy her family was now going to be the very thing that saved it for her and for her son. "You have 24 hours to have your people contact Mr. Brush with the signed agreements," she said, turning to leave. "And Mr. Vance, tell your daughter to stay out of my city and my nursery." She walked out of the room without a backward glance, leaving a stunned Marcus Vance to stare at the folder on the table, the symbol of his complete and utter defeat. This was her ace. It wasn't just a secret asset. It was a strategic masterstroke. Arthur thought he was fighting her for money. She was fighting for control. And she was about to become the majority shareholder of the company he thought was his. The fallout was swift and silent. The following day, Vance Capital issued a terse press release officially withdrawing its bid for Sterling Industries. The market was confused, but the move was decisive. That same afternoon, over $1 billion worth of Sterling stock was transferred to an anonymous trust, the transaction hidden deep within the day's block trades. Just like that, Genevieve Lacroix Sterling, through her son's trust, became the silent majority power behind the company. Arthur knew none of this. He was still trying to fight a war that was already lost. His lawyer, Frank Miller, was growing increasingly frantic, as every legal avenue they tried was shut down with surgical precision by Alger Brush's team. Arthur's motion for custody had been countered with a devastating psychological profile of him painting him as a narcissist, with reckless judgment, using sworn testimony from former colleagues and the damning evidence of the Serafina Vance affair. The final confrontation did not happen in a courtroom. Genevieve had no desire for a public spectacle. She agreed to one final meeting to settle the terms of the divorce. It was held in Alger Brush's office, a space that felt like a judicial chamber with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the steel canyons of Midtown. Arthur arrived looking diminished. The swagger was gone, replaced by a haggard weariness. He had lost weight, and his expensive suit seemed to hang off his frame. He sat opposite Genevieve at the long conference table. It was the first time they had been in the same room since that fateful night. He couldn't meet her eyes. "Jen, please," he began, his voice raspy. "Let's stop this. We can work this out. For Leo." Genevieve looked at him, and for the first time she felt not anger, but a profound emptiness. He was still trying to manipulate her, still using their son's name as a tool. "The time for us to work this out, Arthur, ended when you brought another woman into our child's nursery," she said, her voice calm and devoid of emotion. "We are here to sign the papers." Alger slid the final settlement agreement across the table. "The terms are non-negotiable, Arthur," he said. Arthur's lawyer, Frank, began to bluster. "Now hold on. A 50-50 split of all marital assets, including the company. My client will never agree to." Oh, we're well past that. Alger interrupted, a slight smile on his face. He slid a second document across the table. It was a shareholder disclosure form. Arthur picked it up. He read it. His face went from pale to ashen. He read it again, his eyes widening in disbelief as he looked at the name of the trust and its controlling interest. He looked up at Genevieve, his mouth agape. How was all he could manage to whisper? "You thought this was a divorce," Arthur Genevieve said, finally meeting his gaze. Her eyes were like chips of ice. "This was a leveraged buyout. You put this company, my son's legacy, at risk with your recklessness. I simply secured it." The reality crashed down on him. She owned him. She controlled the company he had built. He was the CEO, but she was now the board. He served at her pleasure. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been completely inverted. "The settlement is this," Alger stated plainly. "Genevieve will waive her claim to a 50-50 split. She is, after all, a benevolent majority shareholder." The sarcasm was subtle, but sharp. "Instead, you will cede this apartment, the Hamptons estate, and the full art collection to her. You will fund a trust for Leo with $200 million in cash. Your own assets will remain yours. You will remain CEO of Sterling Industries for now, on a probationary basis. Your actions will be closely monitored by the board, which I now have the honor of advising." It was a total surrender. He was being left with his money but stripped of his power, his homes, his family, and his pride. He was a king, reduced to a figurehead in his own kingdom. Defeated Arthur signed the papers. His hand trembled as he pushed the document back across the table. He stood up, a broken man, and walked out of the room without another word. 3 weeks later, Leo Charles Lacroix was born. He had Genevieve's eyes and a peaceful disposition. Genevieve, now formally using her maiden name, again moved back into the Fifth Avenue penthouse. The nursery had been completely redone. The murals were gone, replaced with a serene, hand-painted landscape of the French countryside near her family's ancestral home. The air smelled of clean linen and baby powder. The desecration had been erased, replaced by a new beginning. She did not seek a new relationship. Her focus was singular, her son and her empire. She took an active role as chairwoman of the board, her sharp mind and quiet strength proving far more effective than Arthur's blustering charm had ever been. She was respected, feared, and ultimately triumphant. One evening, holding a sleeping Leo in her arms, she stood by the vast windows of the penthouse, looking down at the glittering expanse of Central Park. She was not the same woman who had lived here just a few months ago. That woman was gone, burned away in the fire of betrayal. The woman who remained was stronger, forged in steel, the true heir to her grandmother's legacy. She had faced the ultimate storm, and had not just survived. She had learned to command the wind. Genevieve Lacroix's story is a powerful reminder that the deepest betrayals can often forge the strongest resolve. She didn't just get mad, and she didn't just get even. She rewrote the entire game, transforming her pain into power and securing not just her own future, but the legacy of her child. She walked in on a nightmare and walked out with an empire. Hers is a testament to the fact that true strength isn't about never falling. It's about how you rise, and in the world of the elite, sometimes rising means taking everything. If Genevieve's story of strength and retribution resonated with you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who appreciates a story of ultimate victory. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more tales of drama, intrigue, and justice. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What would you have done in her position? Until next time. The anonymous email landed in my inbox at 2:17 a.m. The subject line was just 2 words, St. Jude's. Inside there was no text, only a link. A link to a video that would detonate my life. It was raw, grainy security footage from the maternity ward of the very hospital where my husband Michael had supposedly mourned the loss of our stillborn son just 3 weeks earlier. But the video didn't show a grieving father. It showed a man I barely recognized, his face etched, not with sorrow, but with a chilling, frantic energy. And the woman he was, with her hand clutching his. That woman wasn't me. They say the truth sets you free. But as I watched that footage, all I felt was the cold, hard reality of a lie so monstrous it would unravel not just a marriage, but the very fabric of who I thought we were. My world, the one I had so meticulously curated, was painted in shades of beige and pottery barn. It was a world of scented candles, Sunday brunches, and the soft cashmere-wrapped dream of impending motherhood. Michael and I were that couple, the ones whose Christmas cards made other people vaguely resentful. He was a successful architect, all sharp lines and even sharper suits, with a smile that could disarm a hostile boardroom. I was a freelance graphic designer, a profession that allowed me the flexibility to nest, to obsess over paint swatches for the nursery, and to scroll endlessly through baby name forums. Our life in our sprawling suburban home just outside of Austin, Texas, was a testament to shared ambition, and I thought shared love. We'd met in college, a whirlwind romance that had settled into the comfortable rhythm of a decade-long marriage. We'd weathered his demanding career, my brief but intense flirtation with opening a bakery, and the quiet, creeping anxiety of trying for a baby. When the 2 pink lines finally appeared on the pregnancy test, it felt less like a surprise and more like a hard-won victory. Michael had wept. He'd dropped to his knees and pressed his ear to my still flat stomach, whispering promises to our unborn child. He was an exemplary, expectant father. He assembled the crib with an engineer's precision, attended every Lamaze class, and learned to expertly massage my swollen ankles. He'd talk to my belly for hours, telling our son, whom we'd already named Caleb, about the world he was about to enter. The pregnancy was, for the most part, idyllic. I'd lean into the stereotype, craving pickles and ice cream, and Michael would dutifully make midnight runs to the 24-hour grocery store. Our friends Mark and Sarah, who had 2 boisterous toddlers of their own, would watch us with a knowing, almost pitying fondness. "Just you wait," Mark would chuckle, ruffling Michael's hair. "Sleep now. You'll thank me later." The first fissure in our perfect world appeared so subtly, I almost missed it. It was a Tuesday afternoon, about a month before my due date. Michael called, his voice strained. "Sweetheart, I have to fly out to Chicago. A last-minute thing with the Harrison project. A major investor is threatening to pull out." Chicago now. I'd asked, a knot of disappointment tightening in my chest. We had a birthing class that evening. "I know, I'm so sorry, Amelia. I wouldn't go if it wasn't a 5-alarm fire. I'll be back Thursday, I promise. I love you. I love you both." He was so convincing, so genuinely apologetic, that I'd pushed my unease aside. It was his job. It was our future. But then, a few days after he was supposed to have returned, I was scrolling through Instagram. A girl I'd gone to college with, a bubbly blonde named Chloe Jenkins, who now worked in PR in Chicago, had posted a story, a picture of a crowded, trendy cocktail bar, the kind with Edison bulbs and artisanal gin, and there in the background, unmistakable even in the blurry periphery, was Michael. He was laughing, his head tilted back, a drink in his hand. He wasn't in a suit. He was wearing a casual Henley, the one I always said brought out the blue in his eyes. And his arm was draped casually around the shoulders of a striking redhead I'd never seen before. My blood ran cold. I took a screenshot, my fingers trembling. When I confronted him, showing him the picture, he didn't even flinch. He looked at me with those earnest blue eyes and laughed. A short, dismissive sound. "Amy, sweetheart, you're seeing things. That's not even me." "Michael, I know what you look like. It's a blurry photo. It's some guy who looks like me." "And Chloe? You know she's always been a bit of a drama queen. Probably just trying to stir something up." He pulled me into a hug, stroking my hair. "You're hormonal, baby. It's okay. I was in meetings the entire time. I was miserable. I missed you and Caleb every second." He was so good. So plausible. He showed me his expense reports, a string of Uber rides to a bland corporate office park, a dinner for one at a generic steakhouse. He had an answer for everything. I wanted to believe him. The alternative was a chasm I wasn't ready to face. So I let it go. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the stress of the impending birth was making me irrational. I deleted the screenshot. I apologized. And I tucked the incident away in a dark corner of my mind, a place I refused to visit. 2 weeks later, I went into labor. It was premature, a full 3 weeks early, but the doctors at St. Jude's Medical Center weren't overly concerned. The contractions came hard and fast. Michael was by my side, a rock. He held my hand. He breathed with me. He whispered encouragement. He was the perfect husband, the perfect father-to-be. The hours blurred into a haze of pain and fear. There were complications. The baby's heart rate was dropping. The calm, reassuring voices of the nurses started to take on a sharper edge. The room filled with more people. I remember the anesthesiologist's kind eyes, the cold sting of the epidural. I remember the doctor, a woman with a stern but compassionate face, saying, "We need to get him out now." Then nothing. A black, empty void. I woke up in a quiet, dimly lit room. The first thing I noticed was the silence. The rhythmic beeping of the monitors was gone. The bustling energy of the labor ward had been replaced by a heavy, oppressive stillness. Michael was slumped in a chair by my bed, his face buried in his hands. His shoulders were shaking. "Michael?" My voice was a dry, raspy whisper. He looked up, and his face broke me. It was a mask of utter devastation. His eyes were red-rimmed and hollow. Tears streamed down his cheeks unheeded. "He's gone, Amy." He choked out, his voice thick with a grief so profound it seemed to suck the air from the room. "Caleb, he didn't make it." The words didn't compute. They were just sounds, meaningless syllables that my brain refused to assemble into a coherent thought. I looked down at my body, at the flat expanse of my stomach beneath the thin hospital blanket. The life that had been there, the kicks and flutters that had become the rhythm of my days, was gone. The doctor came in and explained it in gentle clinical terms. Placental abruption, a rare catastrophic event. There was nothing anyone could have done. It was no one's fault. They were so sorry for my loss. The days that followed were a blur of unimaginable pain. I was a ghost, haunting the corridors of my own life. The nursery, once a room of joyful anticipation, became a mausoleum. Every tiny onesie, every perfectly folded blanket was a dagger to my heart. Michael was my shadow, my keeper. He handled everything. The hospital paperwork, the funeral arrangements, a small private service that I was too sedated to fully comprehend. He fielded the calls from concerned friends and family. He held me when I woke up screaming in the night. He seemed to be drowning in his own sea of grief. He lost weight. Dark circles appeared under his eyes. He'd sit for hours in the rocking chair in the nursery, just staring at the empty crib. He was the very picture of a bereaved father, and I clung to him. His grief was the only thing that validated my own. We were in this together, two shipwrecked survivors on a desolate shore. Our shared loss was the fragile raft that kept us afloat. I needed his pain to be as real as mine. It was the only thing that made sense in a world that had suddenly cruelly stopped making sense. The lie was perfect. It was seamless, comprehensive, and utterly devastatingly believable. He had built a fortress of sorrow around us, and I, his willing prisoner, had never once thought to check if the walls were real. The first 3 weeks after we lost Caleb were a suffocating fog. Time became a fluid, meaningless concept marked only by the rising and setting of the sun, which I mostly observed from the cocoon of my bed. Michael was my constant, my warden of grief. He brought me meals I didn't eat, coaxed me into showers I didn't want, and filled the silence with a steady stream of soothing, empty words. "We'll get through this, Amy. He'll always be our son. I love you so much." His performance was flawless. He never missed a beat. When my mother came to stay for a week, her own face a mirror of my sorrow, she'd watch Michael with tear-filled eyes. "You're a good man, Michael," she'd whispered to him in the kitchen one afternoon, a moment I overheard from the top of the stairs. "Thank God Amelia has you." He'd even begun to channel his grief into a project. He announced one evening, his voice heavy but resolute, that he was designing a memorial garden for the hospital, a place for parents like us. He'd said, his gaze distant, a place to remember the children we never got to hold. He'd spend hours at his drafting table, sketching intricate plans for fountains and benches and flower beds. It was all so noble, so heartbreakingly poignant. But grief is a strange and unpredictable beast. In its initial all-consuming phase, it blinds you. But as the raw, visceral agony begins to recede, even slightly, a new kind of clarity can emerge. Your senses, dulled by shock, slowly begin to sharpen. You start to notice things, small things, inconsistencies. The first crack was small, almost imperceptible. It was a bill, an itemized statement from the hospital. I'd found it in the mail which Michael had taken to sorting through before I saw it, to protect you from any unnecessary stress, he'd said. This one had apparently slipped through his filtration system. I scanned the list of charges, a morbid curiosity compelling me to relive the trauma in black and white. Anesthesia, operating room fees, pharmacy, and then a line item that made me pause. NICU, level 3 care, 3 days. NICU, neonatal intensive care unit. I frowned. Why would Caleb have been in the NICU? The doctor had been clear. It was a stillbirth. He was gone before he was born. There was no care, intensive or otherwise. I assumed it was a clerical error, a common enough occurrence in the bureaucratic labyrinth of healthcare. But the detail lodged itself in my mind, a tiny burr under the skin. The second crack appeared a few days later. Sarah, my best friend, came over bearing a casserole and a bottle of wine she knew I wouldn't drink. She sat with me on the couch, letting the silence hang comfortably between us, before she finally spoke. "How are you really?" she asked, her voice gentle. I gave her my standard, non-committal answer. "Getting by." She nodded, her eyes full of a sympathy that for the first time felt a little off. There was something else there, a hesitation, a flicker of pity. No, that wasn't it. It was something closer to discomfort. "Amy," she began, choosing her words carefully. "When Michael called us from the hospital, he was a wreck. Mark and we wanted to come right away, but Michael was so insistent. He said you didn't want to see anyone, that you needed space." "I did," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I couldn't face anyone." "I get that," she said quickly. "Of course I do. But he said something else. Something odd." I waited, my body tensing. "He said that they had Caleb on life support," she said, her brow furrowed in confusion. "He said you were both just waiting, making a decision. He was asking Mark about what that was like to let go." The casserole on my lap suddenly felt like a lead weight. Life support. A decision. This was a narrative I hadn't heard, a version of the story that diverged wildly from the one I had been told. "He must have been confused," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "He was in shock. We all were." "Of course," Sarah said, immediately backing down, sensing my distress. "That must be it. Oh, Amy, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have even brought it up. It stuck with me." But it stuck with me, too. It joined the NICU charge, another piece of a puzzle I didn't know I was solving. That night I couldn't sleep. The image of Michael on the phone with Mark, fabricating a story about our son on life support, played on a loop in my head. Why? Why would he lie about something so specific, so sacred? Was his grief so profound it had created false memories? Or was it something else? The memory of the Instagram photo from Chicago, the one I had so willingly dismissed, resurfaced with a vengeance. The laughing man with his arm around the redhead. "You're hormonal, baby. It's some guy who looks like me." My hands started to tremble. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Michael, who was sleeping soundly, a picture of peaceful exhaustion. I tiptoed into his home office, the room where he was designing his memorial garden, a sanctuary of his supposed sorrow. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the silent house. I didn't know what I was looking for. I just knew I had to look. His laptop was closed on his desk. I opened it. It was password protected, of course. I tried our anniversary. Nothing. I tried my birthday. Nothing. I tried Caleb. The screen unlocked. A wave of nausea washed over me, using our dead son's name as a password. The thought was both sickening and, in a twisted way, perfectly in character with the grieving father he was pretending to be. His email was already open. I felt a pang of guilt, a lifetime of respecting his privacy, warring with the gnawing suspicion that was now consuming me. I clicked on his sent folder. There were emails to contractors about the memorial garden, emails to his colleagues, thanking them for their condolences. And then I saw it. A thread of emails with a woman named Jenna. Jenna Reed. My breath hitched. The redhead from the Instagram photo. The emails went back months. They started professionally enough, something about a joint project between his firm and hers in Chicago. But the tone quickly shifted. They became familiar, flirty, intimate. They talked about meeting for drinks for dinner. They talked about her recent divorce. They talked about how alive he felt when he was with her. I scrolled down, my vision blurring with tears. The dates were a brutal chronological indictment. There was an email from the day he'd supposedly flown to Chicago for his 5-alarm fire meeting. From Michael Davenport to Jenna Reed. Subject: on my way, wheels up. Can't wait to see you. Counting the minutes. Ditch the boring conference dinner tonight. I found a place I think you'll love. And then I found the emails from the week Caleb had died. He'd been emailing her from the hospital, while I was in labor, while I was in surgery, while I was lying in a drugged haze, believing he was by my side, drowning in grief. From Michael Davenport to Jenna Reed. Subject: it's happening. Amelia's in labor. It's early. This is it. Talk soon. Then a few hours later. From Michael Davenport to Jenna Reed. Subject: it's happening. It's a nightmare here. Complications. Don't know what's going on. I'll call you when I can. And then the email that made me physically recoil, a gasp escaping my lips. It was sent the morning after I'd been told our son was gone. From Michael Davenport to Jenna Reed. Subject: I need you. It's over. He didn't make it. It's for the best. I know we talked about this, the timing. It would have been impossible, but God, Jenna, it's still... I can't explain it. She's a mess. I have to be the strong one here. I have to play the part. But all I can think about is you. All I want is to be with you. This whole thing, it just makes me realize I can't live this lie anymore. As soon as I can, I'm coming to you. It's for the best. The timing. It would have been impossible. I have to play the part. The words swam before my eyes. The fortress he had built crumbled around me, and I saw the lie for what it was. It wasn't about shared grief. It was about an affair. It was about an exit strategy. The death of our son wasn't a tragedy he was enduring with me. It was a complication he was managing. A messy, loose end he needed to tie up so he could move on to his new life, his new woman. The NICU charge. The story about life support to Sarah and Mark. It all clicked into place with sickening clarity. These weren't the ramblings of a grief-stricken mind. They were lies. Scaffolding to support a bigger, more monstrous lie. He needed a story that was dramatic, that required his constant attention, that isolated me, and made him the heroic, grieving husband. A story that bought him time. My grief, which had been a raw, open wound, was suddenly eclipsed by a rage so white-hot, it was almost dizzying. The man sleeping in my bed, the man whose tears I had wiped away, the man whose hand I had clung to, as if it were a lifeline, was a stranger, a monster. I closed the laptop, my movements stiff and robotic. I walked out of the office and back into our bedroom. I stood by the bed, looking down at his sleeping face. He looked so peaceful, so innocent, and I felt a chilling, terrifying calm settle over me. The fog had lifted, and in its place was a cold, hard certainty. I didn't know what the full truth was, but I was going to find out. And I was going to burn his world to the ground. It was in this state of cold fury in the dead of night, fueled by betrayal and a desperate need for irrefutable proof, that I did something I never would have imagined myself capable of. I thought about the hospital, St. Jude's, a place of immense pain, but also a place with answers. I thought about the inconsistencies, the lies. And I thought about the one thing that doesn't lie. Cameras. I sent an anonymous email to a local investigative journalist, a woman named Isabella Rossi, whose work I'd followed, known for her tenacity in uncovering institutional malfeasance. And then I sent another one from a different burner account to a victims' rights group that specialized in medical negligence. I didn't know what would come of it, but I had planted a seed. I had lit a match. Now all I could do was wait for the explosion. It came a week later in the form of that 2:17 a.m. email. The one with the subject line, St. Jude's. The one with the link that would change everything. I clicked it, and my world went from a nightmare into a living hell. The video player loaded a stark white box against the dark screen of my laptop. There was no sound, just the silent, unblinking eye of a security camera. The timestamp in the corner read 8:14 p.m. on the day Caleb died. The angle was from high in a corner, looking down on a section of a hospital corridor. It was unmistakably St. Jude's. The same pale green walls, the same polished linoleum floors I had stared at in a daze. The sign on the wall was blurry, but I could make out the letters NICU. My heart hammered against my ribs. This is it. A nurse in blue scrubs walked briskly past the camera. A doctor followed a moment later. Then from the left of the frame, Michael appeared. My Michael. He was wearing the same dark grey sweater I'd laid out for him that morning. But the man on the screen was not the devastated husband-to-be I remembered. His posture was rigid, his movements jerky and agitated. He was pacing, running a hand through his hair, his phone pressed to his ear. He looked trapped, cornered. He stopped pacing and leaned against the wall directly under the camera. He was talking animatedly, his free hand gesturing in frustration. I couldn't hear the words, but I could read the panic in his body language. This was not a man waiting for news about his laboring wife. This was a man trying to control a situation that was spiraling out of his grasp. Then from the right of the frame she appeared. Jenna Reed. The redhead from the Instagram photo, the name in the emails. In the flesh. She was wearing a chic black coat, looking utterly out of place in the sterile hospital environment. She walked directly to Michael, her face a mixture of concern and impatience. I watched my breath caught in my throat as she reached him. She put a hand on his arm. He immediately flinched, pulling away, shaking his head and glancing nervously down the hallway in the direction of my delivery room. He said something to her, his expression hard and dismissive. She recoiled, her own face hardening. They began to argue, a silent, frantic pantomime of rage and recrimination. She jabbed a finger at his chest. He grabbed her wrist. She tried to pull away. It was ugly, vicious, a scene not of shared comfort, but of a clandestine meeting gone horribly wrong. This wasn't a friend offering support. This was a confrontation. And then the most damning moment of all. A doctor, the same stern-faced woman who had delivered the news of Caleb's death to me, walked towards them from the direction of the NICU. She had a clipboard in her hand. She approached Michael, her expression grave. Michael's entire demeanor shifted. The anger vanished, replaced instantly by a mask of gut-wrenching sorrow. He physically crumpled, leaning his head against the wall, covering his face with his hands. It was a performance, a switch flipped. Jenna stood by her arms crossed, watching him with a look of cold, calculating assessment. The doctor spoke to Michael for a few moments, her hand on his shoulder in a gesture of compassion. She pointed back towards the NICU. Michael shook his head vehemently. The doctor spoke again, her expression turning from sympathy to something more insistent. She seemed to be urging him towards the unit. He refused again, more forcefully this time, waving a hand dismissively. He said something that made the doctor's eyes widen in disbelief. Then she simply nodded, a look of profound sadness and perhaps a touch of disgust on her face, and walked away. Once the doctor was gone, Michael straightened up. The mask of grief fell away as quickly as it had appeared. He turned back to Jenna, his face a snarl of pure fury. He grabbed her by the arm and pulled her roughly down the corridor, away from the NICU, away from my room and out of the camera's frame. The video ended. I stared at the blank screen, the silence of the room roaring in my ears. The pieces didn't just fall into place. They slammed together with the force of a car crash. Caleb had been in the NICU. The bill was not a mistake. Sarah had not misheard. My son had been born alive. He had been alive, and he had been fighting for his life in a glass box just down the hall, and my husband, his father, had been in the corridor, arguing with his mistress. The doctor had tried to bring him to his son. She was urging him towards the unit, and he had refused. The lie was so much more monstrous than I could ever have conceived. He hadn't just lied about an affair. He hadn't just lied about the timing of Caleb's death to make his getaway easier. He had lied about our son's entire existence. He had let me believe our child was stillborn, a silent, painless tragedy, when in reality Caleb had lived. He had breathed, and he had died alone without his mother while his father refused to even go see him. Why? The answer was right there in the video, in the cold, hard expression on Jenna Reed's face, in the frantic, trapped energy of my husband, a living, breathing baby, a premature baby who would require months of intensive care and a lifetime of devotion that was not part of their plan. It was the ultimate complication. A stillbirth was a tragedy you could mourn and move on from. A critically ill child was an anchor, a lifelong responsibility that would have chained Michael to me forever. So he made a choice. He chose his affair over his son. He rewrote the narrative. He turned our son's fight for life into a story of instantaneous death. He curated my grief, managed my reality, to fit his sordid escape plan. The rage that had been simmering inside me erupted into a volcanic inferno. It was a physical force, so powerful I thought it would tear me apart. I wanted to scream. I wanted to destroy something. I wanted to walk into the bedroom and wake him up, not with words, but with my bare hands. But then a different instinct took over, a cold, chilling calm. The same calm I'd felt when I'd decided to look at his laptop. This wasn't a private matter anymore. This wasn't a marital dispute to be settled with screaming matches and thrown pottery. He hadn't just betrayed me. He had committed an act of unimaginable cruelty against his own child. He had defrauded a hospital. He had lied to doctors. And he had enlisted his mistress as a co-conspirator. The leaked footage wasn't just my personal vindication. It was evidence. I forwarded the email with the video link to Isabella Rossi, the investigative journalist. My note was simple. This is security footage from St. Jude's Medical Center on the night of May 12th. The man in the video is Michael Davenport, a prominent Austin architect. He told his wife their son was stillborn. As you can see, that was a lie. Look into the NICU records. Look into Jenna Reed of Reed PR in Chicago. Look into the memorial garden he is currently fundraising for. He didn't just have an affair. He let his son die alone to save it. And then I forwarded it to the police. The story broke 2 days later. It wasn't just a local story. It went national. Isabella Rossi's article was a masterpiece of controlled fury, laying out the facts in stark, brutal detail. "The architect of a monstrous lie," the headline screamed. The article included stills from the security footage, Michael's face contorted in anger or Jenna's cold and watchful. It detailed the timeline, the emails, the hospital bill, the confirmation from anonymous sources at St. Jude's that baby boy Davenport had indeed spent 72 hours in the NICU before succumbing to complications of his premature birth. They had tried repeatedly to get the father to come and see the child to authorize certain procedures, but he had been unreachable or unwilling to engage. The public response was instantaneous and savage. The story was a perfect storm of infidelity, betrayal, and the ultimate parental sin. Michael became a villain of almost cartoonish proportions overnight. His face was everywhere, on cable news, on tabloid websites, on social media feeds. The name Michael Davenport became synonymous with narcissistic cruelty. His firm fired him, issuing a public statement denouncing his deplorable and unethical personal conduct. The fundraising page for the memorial garden was taken down, but not before screenshots circulated online, a testament to his staggering hypocrisy. People found his social media, his firm's page, my own long-dormant accounts. The comments were a torrent of hatred. Monster. Psychopath. I hope he rots in hell. Jenna Reed was not spared. Her PR firm's website was flooded with one-star reviews. Her professional headshot was juxtaposed with the grainy security footage, still of her watching Michael's fake breakdown. She was branded the home-wrecking ghoul. Her career was incinerated in a matter of hours. I watched it all unfold from the guest room of Mark and Sarah's house. I had packed a single bag the morning after I saw the video and left before Michael woke up. I left my wedding ring on the pillow next to his head. I didn't leave a note. The entire world was about to leave him a note. My own role in the story was that of the tragic victim. The media painted me as the poor, grieving mother doubly betrayed by her monstrous husband. My photo, a smiling, pregnant shot from my Instagram, was splashed everywhere. I received an outpouring of sympathy from strangers around the world. It was surreal and strangely numbing. Their pity felt as distant and impersonal as their rage towards Michael. The only thing that felt real was the new agonizing truth about my son. Caleb. He had lived. He had a birth date and a death date. He had been a person in the world, however briefly. And this new knowledge brought with it a new kind of grief. It was sharper, more defined. I wasn't just mourning the loss of a dream anymore. I was mourning a real boy, a boy whose father had discarded him like a piece of trash. A few days after the story broke, Michael was arrested. The charge wasn't murder or anything as dramatic as the online mob wanted. It was fraud. He had knowingly provided false information to the hospital, leading them to misclassify the death and issue an incorrect death certificate. There were also questions about medical decisions that were delayed or not made because of his refusal to engage. It was a messy, complex legal situation, but for now, the fraud charge was enough to hold him. I saw his mugshot online. The handsome, charming architect was gone. In his place was a hollow-eyed, unshaven man with a haunted, terrified expression. He looked broken, but I felt nothing. No pity, no satisfaction, just a vast, cold emptiness. The unveiling was complete. The perfect life, the perfect husband, the perfect grief, it had all been a lie. And now the truth in all its ugly, brutal glory was out for the world to see. I had gotten the truth. I had gotten my revenge. But as I sat in that quiet guest room, Surrounded by the wreckage of my life, I had to face the terrifying question of what came next. The world loves a good villain, and Michael Davenport was tailor-made for the role. The media frenzy was relentless, a piranha-like swarm that stripped every detail of our lives down to the bone. Our wedding photos holiday, snaps my baby shower pictures. They were all repurposed as exhibits in the public trial of my husband. Each smiling image was now imbued with a sinister irony. Look at the happy couple just months before he let their baby die. I remained sequestered at Mark and Sarah's, a voluntary prisoner in their suburban guest room. They were magnificent, acting as gatekeepers against the world. They fielded calls from reporters, deflected nosy neighbors, and kept me supplied with tea and tissues. Sarah would sit with me for hours, not pressing me to talk, just offering a solid, comforting presence against the tsunami of chaos. My grief for Caleb had transformed. The murky, undefined sorrow of losing a stillborn child was replaced by the sharp, specific agony of mourning a son I never knew. I requested the full medical records from St. Jude's. They arrived in a thick manila envelope, and I read them with a forensic intensity. I learned his weight, 3 pounds, 2 ounces. His length, 15 inches. I read the nurse's notes, their neat professional script detailing his every struggle. Infant exhibiting respiratory distress. Apnea episodes increasing in frequency. Attempts to contact father unsuccessful. These clinical details were both torture and a strange kind of solace. They made him real. He wasn't just a phantom kick in my belly. He was a tiny person who had fought. The knowledge was a knife in my heart, but it was a real knife, not the phantom pain I'd been living with. I was no longer grieving a possibility. I was grieving a person. And with that came a new, focused anger. Not just at Michael, but at myself. How had I not known? How could a mother not feel on some primal cellular level that her child was alive? The guilt was a heavy cloak suffocating me. Michael denied bail due to being a flight risk, and the sheer public outrage languished in county jail. His high-powered family in Connecticut hired a top-tier legal team led by a shark of a defense attorney named Marcus Thorne, who immediately went on the offensive. Thorne's strategy was clear paint Michael not as a monster, but as a man who had suffered a profound psychological break. Mr. Davenport was under unimaginable stress. Thorne declared on the courthouse steps, his voice oozing sincerity. The impending birth, the pressures of his career, and a marriage that was already quietly fracturing led to a dissociative episode. He created a false narrative, not out of malice, but because his mind simply could not cope with the reality of his son's critical condition. This is not a case of fraud. It's a case of profound mental trauma. It was a brilliant, insidious defense. It attempted to reclaim the narrative of grief that Michael himself had so expertly woven. I watched the press conference on TV, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. A psychological break. He hadn't had a break. He'd had a plan. The emails to Jenna were proof of that. Speaking of Jenna, she had vanished. Her social media was deleted, her firm's website was offline, and her office was shuttered. The press couldn't find her. But the police did. She was located in a luxury spa resort in Arizona, having fled Chicago the day the story broke. They brought her back to Austin for questioning. She was not charged with a crime, she had broken no laws, but she was a material witness, and facing the ruin of her career and the full force of public condemnation, she decided to save herself. She made a deal with the prosecutors for immunity in exchange for her testimony. Her deposition was leaked to the press, of course. Every sordid detail. She recounted how she and Michael had met, the thrill of their affair, their shared fantasy of a future together. And then she came to the part about the baby. According to Jenna, the pregnancy had been a crisis point. Michael had assured her he would leave me, but the baby complicated everything. Her version of events painted Michael as weak and indecisive a man, panicking as his carefully compartmentalized life began to converge. He told me the baby would trap him, her deposition read. He said that if the baby was born healthy, he'd never be able to leave. The guilt would be too much, the societal pressure too great. We were in the hotel in Chicago when Amelia went into labor. He was a mess. He kept saying, "This is a disaster. This ruins everything." The most chilling part of her testimony concerned the hours at the hospital. She admitted to going there to confront him, to demand he make a choice. And she described the moment he learned Caleb was alive, but critically ill. He came out of the delivery area, and his face was white, she stated. He said, "It's alive, but it's sick. They don't think it's going to make it." And then he looked at me, and I saw a look in his eye. It was cold, calculating. He said, this could be a way out, a clean break. He decided right then and there. He told me the plan he would tell Amelia the baby was stillborn. He said it would be kinder that way. A quick, tragic end, instead of weeks or months of false hope. He said it would let them grieve together, and then, when the time was right, they could go their separate ways. He said it was the only way to manage the situation without destroying everyone. Kinder. He had called this monstrous selfish deception an act of kindness. He had appointed himself the arbiter of my grief, the editor of my reality, to facilitate his escape into a new life. Jenna's testimony destroyed Marcus Thorne's psychological break defense. This wasn't a man unmoored from reality. This was a man executing a premeditated, cold-blooded plan. The fallout from Jenna's deposition was a second explosion ripping through what little was left of our social circle. People were forced to take sides. My side was easy, the wronged wife, the grieving mother. His was impossible. His friends, his colleagues, even some of his family publicly disavowed him. He was utterly alone. One evening, Mark came into the guest room, a grim look on his face. "You got a letter," he said, holding it out as if it were contaminated. "From him. It was sent here from his lawyer." I took it from him, my hand steady. I hadn't heard a single word from Michael since I'd left. No calls, no texts, no emails. Just the public pronouncements of his lawyer. I slit the envelope open. The letter was written on a piece of yellow legal paper, his familiar architectural script looking alien and obscene. "Amelia, I know you will never forgive me. I don't expect you to. I don't forgive myself." Listening to Thorne talk in court, listening to what Jenna said, it's like hearing about a stranger, a monster. I don't know who that man was. The pressure, the lies, it all just avalanched. I was suffocating and I made a choice. A terrible, unforgivable choice. I see his face now, Amy. The nurses at St. Jude's, they showed me a picture. After it was over. I wouldn't look at the time. I refused. But they put a photograph in my discharge file. I found it when I was looking for paperwork for Thorne. I've been looking at it every night here in my cell. He looked like you. He had your nose. I destroyed everything. I destroyed you. I destroyed our son. I destroyed myself. I know sorry is a pathetic, meaningless word. It's an insult. But it's the only one I have. Don't let this destroy you. Please. You are a good person. You deserved a good life, a good husband. You deserved to be Caleb's mother. And I stole that from you. Michael. I read the letter twice. There was no rage left in me. No fire. Just a profound, bone-deep weariness. His apology, his self-pity, his supposed realization, it was all too little too late. It was the pathetic whimper of a man who had been caught. He wasn't sorry for what he did. He was sorry for the consequences. He looked like you. He had your nose. The words were meant to be a bridge, a shared detail of our son. But all it did was highlight the chasm between us. He had a photograph, a picture of our son's face. And he had kept that from me, too. Another secret, another layer of his betrayal. I folded the letter neatly. I did not rip it up. I did not burn it. I placed it in the manila envelope with Caleb's medical records. It was just one more piece of evidence in the case file of my shattered life. The unraveling was almost complete. The lies had all been exposed. The villain had been caged, and the truth was a harsh, unforgiving glare. All that was left was the trial, and the daunting task of figuring out how to live in the scorched earth he had left behind. The trial of Michael Davenport was a spectacle. It felt less like a legal proceeding and more like the final act of a grim, nationally televised play. I was there for every moment, a silent, black-clad figure in the front row. I refused to let the media's portrayal of me as a fragile, broken victim define me. I needed to bear witness. I owed it to Caleb. Michael, clad in an ill-fitting suit, looked like a ghost. The charm and confidence that had once been his armor were gone, replaced by a hollowed-out resignation. He rarely looked at me. When our eyes did meet across the courtroom, his were filled with a desperate, pleading shame. I felt nothing. It was like looking at a stranger. The prosecution, armed with the security footage, the emails and Jenna Reed's damning testimony, laid out their case with brutal efficiency. They painted a picture of a cold, narcissistic man who viewed his own child as a complication to be managed. They called nurses from St. Jude's to the stand who testified through tears about baby boy Davenport's fight for life and their frustrating, futile attempts to get his father involved. He told me on the phone, "There's no point in me coming down there. It's a foregone conclusion." One veteran NICU nurse testified, her voice thick with contempt. "I've been doing this for 30 years. I've seen parents in denial, in shock, in every state of grief imaginable. I have never, ever seen a parent so indifferent." The defense, hamstrung by Jenna's testimony, did their best to salvage the psychological break narrative, but it rang hollow. Marcus Thorne put a psychiatrist on the stand who spoke of narcissistic personality disorder and acute stress reactions. But under cross-examination, even he had to admit that Michael's actions, the meticulous lies, the cover-up, the manipulation of me demonstrated a high degree of planning and cognitive function, not a break from reality. The moment that will forever be seared into my memory was when the prosecution introduced the photograph of Caleb into evidence, the one Michael had mentioned in his letter. They had retrieved it from his files. An evidence technician projected it onto the large screens in the courtroom. And there he was, my son. He was so tiny, nestled in a tangle of wires and tubes. His skin was translucent, his eyes were closed, and his tiny chest was still. But he was beautiful. He was perfect. He had my nose, and a shock of dark hair, just like Michael's. A sound escaped my lips, a raw, guttural sob that I couldn't contain. The courtroom, which had been buzzing with whispers, fell utterly silent. In that moment, he was not baby boy Davenport, the tragic figure in a news story. He was Caleb. My Caleb. And the world was finally seeing him. I saw Michael crumple at the defendant's table, his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent, racking sobs. For the first time, his grief looked real. But it was a selfish grief. Grief for himself, for the life he'd lost, the man he'd failed to be. It had nothing to do with the tiny boy on the screen. The jury was out for less than 2 hours. The verdict was guilty. Guilty of felony fraud. Guilty of reckless endangerment. The judge, a stern, no-nonsense woman, delivered the sentence a week later. She spoke directly to Michael, her voice dripping with scorn. "You did not just lie, Mr. Davenport," she said, her eyes boring into him. "You constructed an alternate reality of unimaginable cruelty. You weaponized your wife's grief and love for you to cover your own pathetic infidelities. You treated the life and death of your own son as an inconvenience to be managed. Your crime is not just against the state or the hospital. It is a crime against humanity, against the very definition of fatherhood. It is one of the most profound acts of narcissistic cruelty I have ever witnessed from this bench." She sentenced him to the maximum possible term, 10 years in state prison. A gasp went through the courtroom. 10 years. It was a harsh sentence for fraud, but it was clear the judge was sentencing the moral crime, not just the legal one. I walked out of the courthouse into a sea of cameras and reporters. I didn't stop. I just kept walking, Mark and Sarah flanking me like bodyguards. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt quiet. The noise that had been roaring in my head for months had finally subsided. It was over. The weeks and months that followed were a slow, painful process of rebuilding. I sold the house, the one with the beige walls, and the nursery that had become a mausoleum. I couldn't bear to be in it another second. I took my half of the assets and moved into a small, bright apartment in a different part of Austin, a part of the city that held no memories of him. I legally changed my last name back to my maiden name, Amelia Shelton. It was a small act, but a significant one. I was no longer Amelia Davenport. That woman, the one who believed in the Pottery Barn fantasy, was gone. She had died with Caleb. I started seeing a therapist who specialized in trauma and grief. We talked about Caleb. We talked about Michael. We talked about the complex, tangled knot of my own guilt and rage. She helped me understand that I couldn't have known that I was the victim of a master manipulator, and that my body and mind, under the trauma of childbirth and what I believed was catastrophic loss, had been in survival mode. I never spoke to Michael again. His lawyers reached out regarding the divorce proceedings, which were swift and uncontested. He signed everything, gave me everything I asked for. It was his final futile act of penance. I heard through the grapevine that Jenna Reed had moved to another state, changed her name, and was attempting to start over forever, branded by her association with the case. I found I didn't have the energy to hate her. She was just another piece of wreckage in the blast zone of Michael's lies. My life now is quiet. It is small. I still work as a graphic designer, but I find my greatest solace in volunteering at a local animal shelter. The uncomplicated, unconditional affection of the abandoned dogs and cats is a balm to my soul. I have a framed copy of Caleb's photograph on my nightstand. It's the only picture I have of him, the one from the courtroom. I look at it every day. I tell him good morning and I tell him good night. I tell him about my day. I tell him that I love him. I am in my own quiet way finally getting to be his mother. The grief for him will never go away. It has become a part of me, a shadow that walks beside me. But it is no longer an all-consuming darkness. Sometimes it is even a source of strength. It reminds me of what is real, of what is important. It reminds me of the devastating cost of lies. I don't know if I will ever trust anyone fully again. I don't know if I will ever remarry or have more children. The future is not a bright, shining path anymore. It is a quiet, winding road, and I am taking it one step at a time. I have survived the unimaginable. I have walked through the fire of the ugliest of truths and come out on the other side. I am scarred. I am changed. But I am still here. And in the quiet of my new life, for the first time, in a very long time, that feels like enough. The story of Amelia and Michael is a harrowing reminder that sometimes the most devastating monsters are the ones sleeping right beside us, hidden behind a mask of love and concern. It's a story about the corrosive power of lies and the unimaginable depths of betrayal. But it's also a story of survival of a woman who walked through an inferno of public humiliation and private agony to reclaim her own truth and find a way to honor the son who was stolen from her twice. If this story touched you, if it made you think, if it made you feel, please take a moment to hit that like button to help us share it with more people. More importantly, leave a comment below. What part of Amelia's story resonated with you the most? And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell so you never miss another story that peels back the layers of the human experience and reveals the truth, no matter how shocking it might be. Thank you for listening.